Hello everyone, hello subscribers, thank you for following me and followers. I try for the most part to upload a video every day, although it doesn't often happen. Sometimes I go for 2 or 3 days without uploading anything. That is because sometimes I have nothing to say. And sometimes because I have so many things to say that it takes me a while to decide on which one to focus and share with you what I'm thinking about. And today I was thinking about what to, I have several ideas, and then somehow, just things sort of come together. And what happened today is that two things happened that urged me to talk about empire, past empires and the current one, if you agree that there is a current one. What happened was that I received a pamphlet, really. Well, it's a little... Yes, it's a sort of a little pamphlet from Hillsdale College in the United States. It's called Imprimis. And they keep sending these things to me because I donated some money ages ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, and they're still very generous in sending me this. And this is the summary of a lecture that Professor Victor Davis Hanson gave to the college. And Professor Hanson, Dr. Hanson, is a distinguished fellow in history at Hillsdale College, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, a professor of classics emeritus at California State University. He is an author. You can see him and hear him on many YouTube interviews. And he's written many books. For example, he is a classics scholar. How the Athenians and the Spartans fought the Peloponnesian War, the Second World Wars, how the first global conflict was fought and won. And of late, or perhaps not so late, he's worried about what is happening in America culturally and the divisions there. And he wrote also a book, The Dying Citizen, how progressive elites, tribalism, and globalization are destroying the idea of America. I got this in the mail. I'm going to go through it because it's not very long. And at the same time, for some reason, while I was washing the dishes, I was listening to the Gaggle. And the Gaggle is a YouTube channel. I urge you to follow it. It's a conversation between two very well-known journalists, and one of them is a professor, Peter Labelle and George Swamili, and they were talking about Austria. Why Austria? Because they said that all of a sudden, it seems that it is the next enemy to follow, as it were, or not to follow. Suddenly, almost, there are articles in Politico in the United States and in the Times of London talking about Austria, very unhappy about Austria because it wants to remain neutral. It has been a neutral country since before the Second World War. Anyway, so they are saying that they refer to the Political article, and they say, well, it seems as if now this is the next country that we are supposed to loathe, as if they write about it as if being neutral and wanting to remain neutral at the moment, currently, it's a sort of a crime. in other words, they Austria keeps buying gas from Russia and so on, and they refer to it as if it is the new villain. The article talks about importing gas and so on from Russia, and they say is paying blood money to Russia. I mean, really strong sentences like this, continuing to buy things from Russia. And they, in the article, they say they are warning Austria, saying that they seem to be incapable of self-reflection. In other words, like Hungary, they don't seem to understand what are the implications. In other words, they are finger wagging. You have to accept our criticism, or you'll get this, something like that. And, we need to have a conversation kind of thing. So, in other words, do as we tell you, more or less. So the article is complaining about Austria being neutral, which means playing all sides. You have to read it. You can get it on the internet. Okay, just Google Austria and Politico, the latest article, something like that, and you will be able to read it. So it seems as if the powers that be are not terribly happy with Austria wanting to remain neutral. They have to take a stand. And so I go to, why is my telephone always? All right. So let me follow then Professor Hanson article, Imperialism, Lessons from History. And even though this is a long introduction, I'm going to urge you to stay with me until the end, because he's going to refer to the classics. And I have the books here from Thucydides and Tacitus and so on, and I'm going to read them to you for a little bit. And the last is the conversation between Athens, the empire, and the little island of is it Levus? Yes. And they're telling them, you better submit. You have no choice. We are the powerful ones. You are a little nothing here. So, and it is a very, very interesting dialogue, and I will read that to you at the end. Let me just start with Professor Hanson. He says the word imperialism comes from the Latin word imperium. It refers to a nation or a state implanting its rule on other states, treating them as subordinates and in an inferior fashion. Some suggest today that America is behaving imperialistically. We do, after all, have some 600 military bases around the world. I heard that it was 750, but so it is worth recalling some historical examples of imperialism to understand what the idea entails. Looking at empires through history, we can identify several things that most of them have in common. One is that their leaders often say or seem to believe that their imperialist policies have little to do with self-interest. We can see an example of such denial in Pericles' famous funeral oration, as recorded in the second book of Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. The speech was delivered in 431 before Christ, at the height of the Athenian Empire. Athens was expropriating tribute from its subject states and had built the Parthenon and the Acropolis and so on. Lots of money that they were getting from the provinces, as it were. In other words, the Athenians were diverting a good portion of their allies' tribute or taxes paid to them, which was supposed to be devoted to mutual defense, to enhancing, they were using it instead to enhancing their city. And what does the imperialist leader, Pericles, have to say of his grand vision? He calls Athens the school of Hellas and proclaims that it will enjoy the admiration of the present and succeeding ages. Athens will not need a poet like Homer to memorialize it. Pericles continues. Why? Because, he says, we have forced every sea and land to be the highway of our daring, and everywhere, whether for evil or for good, have left imperishable monuments behind us. In other words, says Professor Hanson, Athens is proud of its mission to uplift the other Greek city-states by force. Okay, so let me go then to the Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War. And in the funeral oration, it was when after a war you have to bury the dead and so on. And one person of renown would give a speech, as after burying the dead, the soldiers. So he's here encouraging people before he talks about the dead and our respect to them and so on. He's going to remind them to continue fighting, and he's talking about the empire, and he says many good things that you could also use. Obviously, I'm not going to read the whole oration, which is rather long, but you could also read it in terms of not necessarily empire, but of fighting, of patriotism, fighting for your own nation, as it were. And it's an excellent oration, very famous. He says, I'll just read you little parts of it. I shall begin by speaking about our ancestors, since it is only right and proper on such an occasion to pay them the honor of recalling what they did. In this land of ours, they have always been the same people living from generation to generation up till now, and they, by their courage and their virtues, virtue would mean excellence, have handed it on to us, a free country. They certainly deserve our praise. Even more, so do our fathers deserve it. For to the inheritance they have received, they added all the empire we have now. And it was not without blood and toil that they handed it down to us of the present generation. And then we ourselves, assembled here today, who are mostly in the prime of life, have, in most directions, added to the power of our empire and have organized our state in such a way that it is perfectly well able to look after itself both in peace and in war. I have no wish to make a long speech on subjects familiar to you all, so I shall say nothing about the warlike deeds by which we acquired our power, or the battles in which we or our fathers gallantly resisted our enemies, Greek or foreign. What I want to do is, in the first place, to discuss the spirit in which we faced our trials and also our constitution and the way of life which has made us great. After that, I shall speak in praise of the dead, believing that this kind of speech is not inappropriate to the present occasion, and that this whole assembly of citizens and foreigners may listen to it with advantage. Let me say that our system of government does not copy the institutions of our neighbors. It is more the case of our being a model to others than of our imitating anyone else. Our constitution is called democracy because power is in the hands not of a minority but of the whole people. When it is a question of settling private disputes, everyone is equal before the law. When it is a question of putting one person before another in positions of public responsibility, what counts is not membership of a particular class, but the actual ability which the man possesses. No one, so long as he has it in him to be of service to the state, is kept in political obscurity because of poverty. And just as our political life is free and open, so is our day-to-day life in our relations with each other. We do not get into a state with our next-door neighbor if he enjoys himself in his own way, nor do we give him the kind of black looks which, though they do no real harm, still do hurt people's feelings. We are free and tolerant in our private lives, but in public affairs we keep the law. This is because it commands our deep respect. In other words, nothing wrong with this, talking about being patriotic, but of course it is in a larger context. The people of the empire obviously have laws and they're benefiting from it. We give our obedience to those whom we put in positions of authority, and we obey the laws themselves, especially those which are for the protection of the oppressed, and those unwritten laws which it is an acknowledgement shame to break. And here is another point. When our work is over, we are in a position to enjoy all kinds of recreation for our spirits. There are various kinds of contests and sacrifices regularly throughout the year. In our own homes, we find a beauty and a good taste which delight us every day and which drive away our cares. Then the greatness of our city brings it about that all the good things from all over the world flow in to us, so that to us it seems just as natural to enjoy foreign goods as our own local products. Goes on. There are certain advantages, I think, in our way of meeting danger voluntarily, encourage them to go on fighting, with an easy mind, instead of with laborious training, with natural rather than with state-induced courage. We do not have to spend our time practicing to meet sufferings which are still in the future. And when they are actually upon us, we show ourselves just as brave as these others who are always in strict training, the Spartans, always preparing for war. This is one point in which I think our city deserves to be admired. And there are also others, and he goes on. And this is another point of view where we differ from other people. We are capable at the same time of taking risks and of estimating them beforehand. Others are brave out of ignorance, and when they stop to think, they begin to fear. But the man who can most truly be accounted brave is he who best knows the meaning of what is sweet in life and of what is terrible, and then goes out undeterred to meet what is to come. Again, in questions of general good feeling, there is a great contrast between us and most other people. We make friends by doing good to others. This is the empire, not by receiving good from them. We are the good guys. This makes our friendship all the more reliable, since we want to keep alive the gratitude of those who are in our debt by showing continued goodwill to them, whereas the feelings of one who owes us something lack the same enthusiasm, since he knows that when he repays our kindness, it will be more like paying back a debt than giving something spontaneously. We are unique in this. When we do kindness to others, we do not do them out of any calculations of profit or loss. We do them without afterthought, relying on our free liberality. Taking everything together, then, I declare that our city is an education to Greece, and I declare that, in my opinion, each single one of our citizens, in all the manifold aspects of life, is able to show himself the rightful lord and owner of his own person, and do this, moreover, with exceptional grace and exceptional versatility. And to show that this is no empty boasting for the present occasion, but real, tangible fact, you have only to consider the power which our city possesses, and which has been won by those very qualities which I have mentioned. Athens alone of the states we know comes to her testing time in a greatness that surpasses what was imagined of her. In her case, and in her case alone, no invading enemy is ashamed at being defeated, and no subject can complain of being governed by people unfit for their responsibilities. Mighty indeed are the marks and monuments of our empire, which we have left. Future ages will wonder at us, as the present age wonders at us now. We do not need the praises of a Homer, or of anyone else whose words may delight us for the moment, but whose estimation of facts will fall short of what is really true. For our adventurous spirit has forced an entry into every sea and into every land, here's the empire, and everyone we have left behind us everlasting memorials of good done to our friends or suffering inflicted on our enemies. This, then, is the kind of city for which these men, who could not bear the thought of losing her, nobly fought and nobly died. That's part of the Pericles funeral oration, to which Professor Hanson refers. Likewise, he continues, that's Dr. Hanson, with the Roman Republic and Empire. Caesar went into Gaul, France, in 58 before Christ, and in a 9-year period killed perhaps 1 million Gauls and enslaved another million. And yet in Caesar's Gallic Wars and in later Roman literature, we read that Rome brought civilization to Gaul. The elite of Gaul were to wear purple togas, enjoy habeas corpus, and have aqueducts, so it was all for the good. Similarly, with 16th century imperialist Spain, which variously sent a force of 1,500 soldiers into Mexico in 1519 under Hernán Cortés. In 2 years, they destroyed Tenochtitlan, ancient Mexico City, wiping out probably 200,000 people. And was the purpose to gain land, gold, and riches to help in the fight against Protestantism and Islam in Europe? Not exactly, according to Bernal Diaz, who was on the expedition. I have read his book, Bernal Diaz del Castillo. I have it somewhere. He mentions 200 men that went into Mexico, and he was actually part of the expedition. Rather, it was more to convert souls to Christianity and to stamp out sodomy, cannibalism, and human sacrifice, which they did find, by the way, there. It's an amazing story. It's the Conquest of New Spain. He was part of the expedition and refers how way before Hernan Cortés actually managed to get all the other tribes against the Aztecs, because the Aztecs were not very popular with everybody else anyway. But yes, they could smell human blood. They were doing human sacrifices. The priests were not allowed to wash off their blood. They had very, very long hair. Sodomy and other things were there, but also cannibalism. They would actually eat the flesh of the human sacrifice. Anyway, to be sure, the conquest had these effects, but with death and destruction really all for the sake of the conquered. The White Man's Burden, a long controversial poem by Rudyard Kipling, published in 1899, was addressed by a citizen of Imperial England to the United States, which was currently fighting what many saw as an imperialist war in the Philippines. One of the poem's stanzas reads, "Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple and 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain." This sense of duty sums up the common imperialist mindset. Imperialism is a burden, undertaken reluctantly and for the good of the uncivilized. There is little self-serving about it. Another trait, Professor Hanson continues, that empires have in common is obviously their dependence for enforcement on some type of superior military power, most often a navy. True, the Spartans controlled a land empire, as did the Soviet Union, but those empires were confined with self-imposed limitations. If a state becomes a naval power, as Alfred Thayer Mehem pointed out in his classic works on the influence of sea power on history, then it can move troops around the rear of an enemy, impose boycotts, or modulate trade and supplies to help allies or hurt recalcitrant colonies. The greatest empires have always been maritime. The Mediterranean, which the Romans referred to as Mare Nostrum, our sea, has been the seat of empires throughout history because of its geography. It is a convenient sea for imperialists in the middle of 3 land masses. The British Empire, of course, was entirely a result of British naval superiority. And a third characteristic empires share in common, perhaps the most interesting and thought-worthy, is that for all the supposed advantages to be had through imperial rule, a historical case can be made that it has just never quite penciled out. The costs of control seem to outweigh the benefits. Even though, human nature being what it is, the imperialists tend to be oblivious to the expenses, perhaps because of the power and grandeur that come with empire. One reason imperial policy seems superficially advantageous in terms of costs and benefits is the seduction of absolute power, as implied by the Caledonian, the Scottish nationalist Calgacus in 85 AD. As recounted in Tacitus' history, Calgacus complains of the Romans in addressing his troops. Quote, "To robbery, slaughter, plunder, they give the lying name of empire. They make a desert and call it peace." I've got the quote here. Just a second, let me find it. This is from Tacitus in Agricola, I believe. This is the quote from the Scottish leader, Calgacus. "You have not tasted servitude." He's addressing the Romans, the imperialist. "There is no land beyond us, and even the sea is no safe refuge when we are threatened by the Roman fleet. We are the last people on earth, and the last to be free. Our very remoteness in a land known only to rumor has protected us up till this day. Today the furthest bounds of Britain lie open, and everything unknown is given an inflated worth. But now there is no people beyond us, nothing but tides and rocks, and more deadly than these, the Romans. It is no use trying to escape their arrogance by submission or good behavior. They have pillaged the world when the land has nothing left for men who ravage everything. They scour the sea. If an enemy is rich, they are greedy. If he is poor, they crave glory. Neither east nor west can sate their appetite. They are the only people on earth to covet wealth and poverty with equal craving. They plunder, they butcher, they ravish, and call it by the lying name of empire. They make a desert and call it peace." This is what Professor Hanson is referring to here. Now, let me go to Tacitus and the histories. Let me come back to the Annals and history of Tacitus. And you might be interested in some of the things that went on here with the Romans and the English and the Scottish. Meanwhile, in Britain, Publius Ostorius, the praetor, found himself confronted by disturbance. The enemy had burst into the territories of our allies with all the more fury, as they imagined that a new general would not march against them with winter beginning and with an army of which he knew nothing. By the way, he's going to refer first to especially the Ordovices and the Sileres, was actually Wales, North Wales and South Wales. And also the Roman troops will advance to the north, and so Yorkshire, the Brigantes, Newcastle, Cumbria, Lancashire, Anglia. Okay, so before they get further on. Ostorius, well aware that first events are those which produce alarm or confidence, by a rapid movement of his light cohorts, cut down all who opposed him, pursued those who fled, and lest they should rally, and so an unquiet and treacherous peace might allow no rest to the general and his troops, he prepared to disarm all whom he suspected, and to occupy with encampments the whole country to the Avon and the Severn. The Iceni, a powerful tribe which war had not weakened, the Iceni was Anglia to the north, and they had voluntarily joined our alliance, were the first to resist. At their instigation, the surrounding nations chose as a battlefield a spot walled in by a rude barrier with a narrow approach, impenetrable to cavalry. Through these defenses, the Roman general, though he had with him only the allied troops, without the strength of the legions, attempted to break, and having assigned their positions to his cohorts, he equipped even his cavalry for the work of infantry. Then, at a given signal, they forced the barrier, routing the enemy who were entangled in their own defenses. So he's obviously writing it from the Roman point of view. Okay. The rebels, conscious of their guilt and finding escape barred, performed many noble feats. In this battle, Marius Ostorius, the general's son, won the reward for saving a citizen's life. The defeat of the Iceni quieted those who were hesitating between war and peace. Then the army was marched against the Cangi. Their territory was ravaged, spoil taken everywhere without the enemy venturing on an engagement, or if they attempted to harass our march by stealthy attacks, their cunning was also punished, always punished. And now Ostorius had advanced within a little distance of the sea, facing the island Hibernia. In the Irish Sea, I don't know which island they refer to. I have come across Hibernia a number of times. I don't think it's the Isle of Man, but anyway, it's in the Irish Sea, when feuds broke out among the Brigantes in the north, Yorkshire, and compelled the general's return, for it was his fixed purpose not to undertake any fresh enterprise till he had consolidated his previous successes. The Brigantes, indeed, when a few who were beginning hostilities had been slain and the rest pardoned, settled down quietly. But on the Silures, that is the South Wales, neither terror nor mercy had the least effect. They persisted in war and could be quelled only by legions encamped in their country. That this might be the more promptly effected, a colony of a strong body of veterans was established at Camulodunum on the conquered lands as a defense against the rebels and as a means of imbuing the allies with respect for our laws. Anyway, one of the goes on obviously for a long time, but I just tell you, they were defeated. The leader was taken to Rome, and Caractacus and his wife. And this is what he said to the Romans, and I'll finish this section with this. He says, they took the slaves. Next were to be seen his brothers, his wife and daughter. Last of all, Caractacus himself, the leader. All the rest stooped in their fear to abject supplication, but not so the king, Caractacus, who neither by humble look nor speech sought compassion. When he was set before the emperor's tribunal, he spoke as follows to the Romans. Had my moderation in prosperity been equal to my noble birth and fortune, I should have entered this city as your friend, rather than as your captive. And you would not have disdained to receive under a treaty of peace a king descended from illustrious ancestors and ruling many nations. My present lot is as glorious to you as it is degrading to myself. I had men and horses, arms and wealth. What wonder would if I parted with them reluctantly? Why do you wonder? Because I parted with them reluctantly. If you Romans choose to lord it over the world, does it follow that the world is to accept slavery? Were I to have been at once delivered up as a prisoner, neither my fall nor your triumph would have become famous. My punishment would be followed by oblivion, whereas if you save my life, I shall be an everlasting memorial of your clemency. He wasn't supplicating. Upon this, the emperor granted pardon to Caractacus, to his wife, and to his brothers. Released from their bonds, they did homage also to Agrippina, who sat near, who sat near, conspicuous on another throne, in the same language of praise and gratitude. It was indeed a novelty quite alien to ancient manners for a woman to sit in front of Roman standards. In fact, Agrippina boasted that she was herself a partner in the empire which her ancestors had won. All right. Professor Hanson continues. I'll repeat the quote. To robbery, slaughter, plunder, they give the lying name of empire. They make a desert and call it peace. In other words, if imperial powers can't conquer a country and bring it into the fold peacefully, they wipe it out as a signal to others. So much for benefits to either the imperialist power of it or its subjects. One corollary to the unprofitability of empire is that it tends to corrupt the character of the imperial power. The Athenian Empire was based on the idealism of 180 subject city-states being offered the advantage of democracy. City-states conquered by Athens were required to become democracies. And what can be wrong with that? But in 415 BC, a larger Athenian naval force went to the island of Melos and demanded that the Melians submit and begin paying tribute. Thucydides recounts what ensued, the famous Melian Dialogue, in the 5th book of his history. You're either with us or against us, the Athenians threatened, and if you are against us, we will destroy you. The Melians countered that they should be able to remain free and to maintain neutrality in Athens' war with Sparta. It wasn't their war. I started with Austria being neutral. It's not our war. The Athenians rejected the idea of neutrality. The Melians further argued that destroying Melos, the island, would result in anti-Athenian sentiment in Greece. The Athenians replied that it would instead result in fear and awe at Athens' power. In the end, the Melians refused to submit. Following a siege, the Athenians massacred the adult men of Melos and enslaved the women and children. If you can bear with me, it is an amazing dialogue. And again, I'm going to quote what Professor Hanson is referring to here from the actual book. It's not very long, but it might take me perhaps 5 or 10 minutes, but it is worth listening to it, reading it better, obviously, but certainly listening to it. The Athenians went to this little island of Melis, and they wanted to speak to the people. The leaders of the island said, "No, don't speak to everyone in general. Speak to us first as to what you want." And the Athenians said. The Athenian representatives then spoke as follows. "So we are not to speak before the people, no doubt in case the mass of the people should hear once and for all and without interruption an argument from us which is both persuasive and incontrovertible and should so be led astray. This, we realize, is your motive in bringing us here to speak before the few. Now suppose that you who sit here should make assurance doubly sure. Suppose that you, too, should refrain from dealing with every point in detail in a set speech, and should instead interrupt us whenever we say something controversial and deal with that before going on to the next point. Tell us first whether you approve of this suggestion of ours." The council of the Melians replied as follows. "No one can object to each of us putting forward our own views in a calm atmosphere. That is perfectly reasonable. What is scarcely consistent with such a proposal is the present threat, indeed the certainty, of your making war on us. We see that you have come prepared to judge the argument yourselves, and that the likely end of it all will be either war, if we prove that we are in the right and so refuse to surrender, or else slavery." The Athenians reply, "If you're going to spend the time in enumerating your suspicions about the future, or if you have met here for any other reason except to look the facts in the face, and on the basis of these facts to consider how you can save your city from destruction, there is no point in our going on with this discussion. If, however, you will do as we suggest, then we will speak on." The Melians said, "It is natural and understandable that people who are placed as we are should have recourse to all kinds of arguments and different points of view. However, you are right in saying that we are met together here to discuss the safety of our country, and, if you will have it so, the discussion shall proceed on the lines that you have laid down." The Athenians said, "Then we, on our side, will use no fine phrases, saying, for example, that we have a right to our empire because we defeated the Persians, or that we have come against you now because of the injuries that you have done us, a great mass of words that nobody would believe. And we ask you on your side not to imagine that you will influence us by saying that you, though a colony of Sparta, their enemy, have not joined Sparta in the war, or that you have never done us any harm. Instead, we recommend that you should try to get what it is possible for you to get, taking into consideration that we both really do what we both really do think. Since you know as well as we do that when these matters are discussed by practical people, the standard of justice depends on the equality of power to compel, and that in fact the strong do what they have the power to do, and the weak accept what they have to accept." The Melians said, "Then, in our view, since you force us to leave justice out of account and to confine ourselves to self-interest only, in our view it is at any rate useful that you should not destroy a principle that is to the general good of all men, namely, that in the case of all who fall into danger, there should be such a thing as fair play and just dealing, and that such people should be allowed to use and to profit by arguments that fall short of a mathematical accuracy. And this is a principle which affects you as much as anybody, since your own fall would be visited by the most terrible vengeance and would be an example to the world. The Athenians reply, as for us, even assuming that our empire does come to an end, we are not despondent about what would happen next. One is not so much frightened of being conquered by a power which rules over others, as Sparta does, not that we are concerned with Sparta now, as of what would happen if a ruling power is attacked and defeated by its own subjects. Not so much from outside, but from inside. So far as this point is concerned, you can leave it to us to face the risks involved. What we shall do now is to show you that it is for the good of our own empire that we are here, and that it is for the preservation of your city that we shall say what we are going to say. We do not want any trouble in bringing you into our empire, and we want you to be spared for the good both of yourselves and of ourselves. The Melians reply, and how could it be just as good for us to be the slaves as for you to be the masters? Athenians, you, by giving in, would save yourselves from disaster. We, by not destroying you, would be able to profit from you. It's pretty straightforward. The Melians say, so you would not agree to our being neutral, friends instead of enemies, but allies of neither side? Athenians, no, because it is not so much your hostility that injures us. It is rather the case that if we were on friendly terms with you, our subjects would regard that as a sign of weakness in us, whereas your hatred is evidence of our power. The Melians reply, is that your subjects' idea of fair play, that no distinction should be made between people who are quite unconnected with you and people who are mostly your own colonies or else rebels whom you have conquered? Athenians, so far as right and wrong are concerned, they think that there is no difference between the two, that those who still preserve their independence do so because they are strong, and that if we fail to attack them, it is because we are afraid, so that by conquering you, we shall increase not only the size, but the security of our empire. We rule the sea, and you are islanders, and weaker islands too than the others. It is therefore particularly important that you should not escape. Melians, but do you think there is no security for you in what we suggest? For here again, since you will not let us mention justice, but tell us to give in to your interests, we too must tell you that what our interests are, and if yours and ours happen to coincide, we must try to persuade you of the fact. It is not certain that you will make enemies of all the states who are at present neutral, when they see what is happening here, and naturally conclude that in course of time you will attack them too? Isn't that reasonable? Does not this mean that you are strengthening the enemies you have already and are forcing others to become your enemies, even against their intentions and their inclinations. Athenians, as a matter of fact, we are not so much frightened of states on the continent. They have their liberty, and this means that it will be a long time before they begin to take precautions against us. We are more concerned about islanders like yourselves, who are still unsubdued, or subjects who have already become embittered by the constraint which our empire imposes on them. These are the people who are most likely to act in a reckless manner and to bring themselves and us, too, into the most obvious danger. The Melians say, then surely, if such hazards are taken by you to keep your empire and by your subjects to escape from it, we, who are still free, would show ourselves great cowards and weaklings if we fail to face everything that comes rather than submit to slavery. Athenians, no, not if you are sensible. This is no fair fight, with honor on one side and shame on the other. It is rather a question of saving your lives and not resisting those who are far too strong for you. The Melians say, yet we know that in war, fortune sometimes makes the odds more level than could be expected from the difference in number of the two sides. And if we surrender, then all our hope is lost at once. Whereas, so long as we remain in action, there is still a hope that we may yet stand upright. The Athenians say, hope, that comforter in danger? If one already has solid advantages to fall back upon, one can indulge in hope. It may do harm, but will not destroy one. But hope is by nature an expensive commodity, and those who are risking their all on one cast find out what it means only when they are already ruined. It never fails them in the period when such a knowledge would enable them to take precautions. Do not let this happen to you, you who are weak and whose fate depends on a single movement of the scale. And do not be like those people who, as so commonly happens, miss the chance of saving themselves in a human and practical way. And when every clear and distinct hope has left them in their adversity, turn to what is blind and vague, to prophecies and oracles and such things which, by encouraging hope, lead men to ruin. The Melians say, it is difficult, and you may be sure that we know it, for us to oppose your power and fortune, unless the terms be equal. Nevertheless, we trust the gods will give us fortune as good as yours, because we are standing for what is right against what is wrong. And as for what we lack in power, we trust that it will be made up for by our allegiance with the Spartans, who are bound, if for no other reasons than for honor's sake, and because we are their kinsmen, to come to our help. Our confidence, therefore, is not so entirely irrational as you think. The Athenians say, so far as the favor of the gods is concerned, we think we have as much right to that as you have. Our aims and our actions are perfectly consistent with the beliefs men hold about the gods and with the principles which govern their own conduct. Our opinion of the gods and our knowledge of men lead us to conclude that it is a general and necessary law of nature to rule whatever one can. This is not a law that we make ourselves, nor were we the first to act upon it when it was made. We found it already in existence, and we shall leave it to exist forever among those who come after us. We are merely acting in accordance with it, and we know that you or anybody else with the same power as ours would be acting in precisely the same way. And therefore, so far as the gods are concerned, we see no good reason why we should fear to be at a disadvantage. But with regard to your views about Sparta and your confidence that she, out of a sense of honor, will come to your aid, we must say that we congratulate you on your simplicity, but do not envy you your folly. In matters that concern themselves or their own constitution, the Spartans are quite remarkably good. As for their relations with others, that is a long story. But it can be expressed shortly and clearly by saying that of all the people we know, the Spartans are most conspicuous for believing that what they like doing is honorable and what suits their interests is just. And this kind of attitude is not going to be of much help to you in your absurd quest for safety at the moment. The Melians say, but this is the very point where we can feel most sure. Their own self-interest will make them refuse to betray their own colonies, the Melians, for that would mean losing the confidence of their friends among the Hellenes and doing good to their enemies. Athenians, you seem to forget that if one follows one's self-interests, one wants to be safe, whereas the path of justice and honor involves one in danger. And where danger is concerned, the Spartans are not, as a rule, very venturesome. The Melians say, but we think that they would even endanger themselves for our sake and count the risk more worth taking than in the case of others, because we are so close to the Peloponnese that they could operate more easily, and because they can depend on us more than on others, since we are of the same race and share the same feelings. The Athenians say, goodwill shown by the party that is asking for help does not mean security for the prospective ally. What is looked for is a positive preponderance of power in action. And the Spartans pay attention to this point even more than others do. Certainly they distrust their own native resources so much that when they attack a neighbor, they bring a great army of allies with them. It is hardly likely, therefore, that while we are in control of the sea, they will cross over to an island. Millions, but they still might send others. The Cretan Sea is a wide one, and it is harder for those who control it to intercept others than for those who want to slip through to do so safely. And even if they were to fail in this, they would turn against your own land and against those of your allies left unvisited by Brasidas. So instead of traveling about a country which has nothing to do with you, you will find trouble nearer home among your allies and in your own country. Athenians. It is a possibility, something that has in fact happened before. It may happen in your case, but you are well aware that the Athenians have never yet relinquished a single siege operation through fear of others. But we are somewhat shocked to find that, though you announced your intention of discussing how you could preserve yourselves, in all this talk you have said absolutely nothing which could justify a man in thinking that he could be preserved. Your chief points are concerned with what you hope may happen in the future, while your actual resources are too scanty to give you a chance of survival against the forces that are opposed to you at this moment. You will therefore be showing an extraordinary lack of common sense if, after you have asked us to retire from this meeting, you still fail to reach a conclusion wiser than anything you have mentioned so far. Do not be led astray by a false sense of honor, a thing which often brings men to ruin when they are faced with an obvious danger that somehow affects their pride. For in many cases, men still have been able to see the dangers ahead of them, but this thing called dishonor, this word, by its own force of seduction, has drawn them into a state where they have surrendered to an idea, while in fact they have fallen voluntarily into irrevocable disaster, in dishonor that is all the more dishonorable because it has come to them from their own folly rather than their misfortune. You, if you take the right view, will be careful to avoid this. You will see that there is nothing disgraceful in giving way to the greatest city in Hellas when she is offering you such reasonable terms. Alliance on a tribute-paying basis and liberty to enjoy your own property. And when you are allowed to choose between war and safety, you will not be so insensitively arrogant as to make the wrong choice. This is the safe rule, to stand up to one's equals, to behave with deference towards one's superiors, and to treat one's inferiors with moderation. Think it over again, then, when we have withdrawn from this meeting, and let this be a point that constantly recurs to your minds, that you are discussing the fate of your country, that you have only one country, and that its future, for good or ill, depends on this one single decision which you are going to make. Then the Athenians withdrew from the discussion, and the Melians, left to themselves, reached the conclusion, which was much the same as they had indicated in their previous replies, and their answer was as follows. Our decision, Athenians, is just the same as it was at first. We are not prepared to give up in a short moment the liberty which our city has enjoyed from its foundation for 700 years. We put our trust in the fortune that the gods will send and which has saved us up to now, and in the help of men, that is, of the Spartans. And so we shall try to save ourselves. But we invite you to allow us to be friends of yours and enemies to neither side, to make a treaty which shall be agreeable to both you and us, and so to leave our country. The Melians made this reply, and the Athenians, just as they were breaking off the discussion, said, "Well, at any rate, judging from this decision of yours, you seem to us quite unique in your ability to consider the future as something more certain than what is before your eyes, and to see uncertainties as realities, simply because you would like them to be so. As you have staked most on and trusted most in Spartans, luck and hopes, so in all these you will find yourselves most completely deluded." The Athenian representatives then went back to the army, and the Athenian generals, finding that the Melians would not submit, immediately commenced hostilities and built a wall completely round the city of Milos, dividing the work out among the various states. Later they left behind a garrison of some of their own and some allied troops to blockade the place by land and sea, and with the greater part of their army returned home. The force left behind stayed on and continued with the siege. About the same time, enough of that. I continue now with Dr. Hanson's where was it? Okay. He says, as an aside, when I was 18 and just beginning my study of the classics, I was astonished when I read in Thucydides that when the Peloponnesian War broke out, most of the Greeks actually wanted Sparta to win. Was not Athens a democracy and Sparta an oligarchy? The same Athenians wanted the other to win. Athens was the home of Socrates, Pericles, Achilles, Aristophanes, Sophocles. Sparta was rural and backwards with no navy or beautiful temples or walls. It represented Doric severity as opposed to the Ionic cosmopolitanism of Athens. Why would the Greeks prefer that Sparta win? I didn't understand the anomaly when I was 18, but the simple answer soon became clear. Sparta was not then imperial, or at least not as imperial as Athens. Empires like to think of themselves as having a lot of friends, but they are often naive in forgetting the depth of their ill will that they incur on others, even their own citizens sometimes. As if the destruction of Milos wasn't enough to show the hubristic corruption of imperial Athens, the following summer, Athens sent a force of 40,000 troops to Syracuse to conquer or destroy the largest democracy in the Greek world. The Sicilian expeditions, as it came to be known, was a complete disaster. Thucydides says at the end of his 7th book, quote, "They were destroyed, as the saying is, with a total destruction. Their fleet, their army, everything was destroyed, and few out of many returned home." End of quote. For all practical purposes, although the Peloponnesian War would go on for another 9 years, the Sicilian debacle marked the end of the Athenian Empire and illustrated the follies of unchecked imperialism. Every empire has done that, just continued on, and that is their fall. It can be argued that the Roman Republic underwent a similar kind of imperial corruption. In historian Arnold Toynbee's 2-volume work, Hannibal's Legacy, he argued that the period in which Rome fought the 3 Punic Wars, an era during which Rome achieved mastery of almost the entire Western Mediterranean, was ultimately calamitous for Rome because it undermined Rome's republican habits, virtues, and characters. You overextend, I suppose. The Roman people, Toynbee argued, especially the independent yeoman farmers, were sent off for long periods to fight as legionnaires in places like Spain and Numidia, present-day Libya. Their places were taken by some 2 million slaves from conquered provinces who were shipped back to Italy. Huge amounts of money extracted from conquered lands poured into Italy and enriched an elite class, whose members consolidated the farms of the soldiers who were fighting abroad and forged them into large states worked by slaves. In time, the troops overseas, whose successes had been due to the Italian virtues of hard work, independence, autonomy, and agrarianism that one sees emphasized in Virgil's Eclogues and Georgics, became accustomed to plunder. When Carthage finally failed in 146 BC, its population of 50,000, down from 500,000, was enslaved, and the city was razed to its foundations. That same year, the Romans looted and destroyed Corinth, the cultural capital of Greece. The Rome of Virgil, Catullus, the younger Cato, and Cicero was now busy obliterating defeated cities that posed little threat to Roman security. The success that made Rome an empire, Toynbee argued, destroyed Rome by degrading the elements that made it great. Toynbee may not have been right in every respect, but there are certainly parts of his argument that ring true about corrupting the center through incorporating the periphery or diluting a republic by imperial ambitions. This might remind us also of Britain, whose empire probably reached its peak sometime between 1850 and 1860. But if we read Charles Dickens' Bleak House, published in 1852, we see that at the heart of the empire in London, there were vast numbers of people who were in poor houses. At the same time, the country was spending its resources far and wide on its great imperial civilizing mission. This, in turn, might make us think of present-day San Francisco, where people are injecting themselves with drugs, fornicating, urinating, and defecating in the streets, and downtown businesses are closing in large numbers. Or Chicago, where the murder and crime rates are making life there unbearable for so many. Our major cities are going to rot. At the same time, we are pledged to giving 120 billion to Ukraine, already making its military budget the third largest in the world. And the decay goes beyond the large cities. Think of those gruesome scenes in East Palestine and Ohio after the train crash that enveloped the town in a toxic chemical cloud. East Palestine is full of working-class people whom few of our establishment political leaders were willing to go and visit. The people of East Palestine formed a demographic that died at twice the numbers of the general population in our overseas wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yet few in our leadership class, many of whom had made one or more recent trips around the world to Ukraine to visit the Ukrainian people and pose for photos with Mr. Zelensky, few of them went to East Palestine. I don't know if one can properly call the United States an imperialist power, says Professor Hanson. But this phenomenon of neglected and hollowed out cores coupled with widespread overseas investments and commitments tends to be characteristic of empires. Looking outward, we can see two clear manifestations of imperialism today. One is the Chinese brand of imperialism. China, de facto, now controls 15 of the major ports in the world, ports that the Chinese have leased, rebuilt, and refashioned. The Chinese are very far-sighted, so these ports are not just random acquisitions. They control the Panama Canal. They monitor the entry into the Mediterranean at Tangiers and the exit at Port Said. The two largest ports in Europe, Antwerp and Rotterdam, are in the hands of the Chinese, as are the artificial islands in the South China Sea, a gateway for 50% of global oceanic traffic. These are Professor Hanson's views, well thought out views. In other words, the Chinese control 15 points at which, in a global crisis, they will be able to shut off trade and access to commercial goods, oil, and food, not to mention the influence they have gained over local governments. China has also invested in concessions of rare earth mining, oil, and other natural resources in Africa. And due to the naive policies of the current United States administration, the Chinese are developing very close ties not only with Iran but also with Saudi Arabia. This was written in the summer. China today is creating something very much like the British Empire, although the Chinese are more like the imperialists of the Ottoman Empire than those of the British, in that they are neither apologetic nor shy about what they are doing. If the Chinese have an imperial enclave in Africa, they rope it off and don't allow Africans nearby. Nor do they allow colonial peoples, for the most part, to go to Beijing and be educated or integrated. Like the Ottomans, who conquered Constantinople in 1453, China has a monolithic culture and makes no apologies for its ambition to be a global imperial power. The other imperial power we see on the rise today is more insidious. George Orwell's nightmare dystopia in the book 1984 was a world in which there were no nation states, but rather three powers wielding absolute control over three land masses into which everyone had been aggregated. Something like this is the dream of Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and his fellow globalists, many of them American, who meet annually in Davos. Their vision is of a transnational ruling class consisting of elites drawn mostly from the business, political, media, and academic worlds, with the power to issue edicts on climate change, public health, diversity, human rights, and even taxes that override the will of national majorities. If Chinese imperialism follows the tradition of the Ottoman Empire, the globalist vision of Davos imperialism is in the tradition of utopian empires gone astray. I think of Alexander the Great, who fought his first great battle with the Persians in 334 BC at Granicus on the coast of Asia Minor, today's Turkey. When he died a decade later, he had probably killed over 2 million people in creating what he envisioned as an everlasting Hellenistic age based on an idea of the brotherhood of man. Alexander never thought of himself as a mere killer. He was an idealistic conqueror. And to this day, if you were to go to Greece and criticize Alexander, you would earn a hostile reaction. Alexander was an effective propagandist, as is the Davos crowd with their argument that the totalitarian rule they want to impose is for our benefit and the larger brotherhood of man. Let me close by saying that in 1897, Rudyard Kipling was asked to present a poem at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, marking her 60th year as Queen. The British Empire, admittedly the most civilizing and humane of any empire in history, was in full bloom. It had 420 million people under its sway and covered 12 million square miles of territory, 7 times the area of the Roman Empire. Kipling originally planned to present, quote, the white man's burden at the event. But he decided instead to present Recessional, a bleak poem that includes this stanza. Quote, "Far cold, our navies melt away, on dune and headlands sinks the fire. Lo, all our pomp of yesterday is one with Nineveh and Tyre. Judge of the nations, spare us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget." Recessional is a poem of lamentation in which Kipling, known to be a great supporter of the British Empire, seems to be warning that it is destined to fail. Maybe he had been studying history. And that is the end of Victor Davis Hanson article and my little readings and contributions to it. I thank you so very much. Bye-bye.